Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Board Gaming Doctor. My name is Phil, and I'll be your Board Game Doctor today. In this episode, I go over my first impressions of Rise of Babel. This will be a game that will be kickstarted in July of this year at the time of this recording, in about a month or so. And this game is designed by Ivan Alexiev and Elijah Morar, art by Andrew Bosley, published by Bedouin Games. As an overview, in this game you are simulating the construction of the biblical Tower of Babel, utilizing deck building and track advancement to acquire and place tiles onto a shared tower construction site, playing a tile-laying puzzle game where you try to get as many adjacent tiles of your color in orthogonal and diagonal rows. The player with the most points after 3 construction rounds wins the game. To go over some game highlights and mechanisms here, first the deck building aspect. Here you find standard deck building rules, and with how your hand plays as well as how cards are acquired from a market row, everything is very familiar if you have played past deck building games such as Dominion. Most cards have multiple options on them as well, in an either-or format. Next, the tile placement. From a bag you draw random tiles to place onto a holding area on your tableau, ultimately to be placed onto the Tower of Babel, but as you play cards from your hand, you will take steps to get those tiles to the tower, such as loading them onto elephants, progressing those elephants along a track to advance towards the construction site. And you can also place tiles into a warehouse, which may allow for opportunities to gain extra gold, to purchase cards from the market, or to place those tiles directly to the tower without going through the elephants. At the construction site, you play tiles wherever you can, potentially covering up bonus spots for extra actions as well. In addition to the main tower, you have other small 2x2 tower grids that you can play tiles to help increase your scoring opportunities. Note that there are opportunities to play confusion tiles onto the construction site, which thematically confounds the languages of the people, and when these tiles are placed, they count as negative points to the tiles of players adjacent to it. Next, the round structure. So once one floor of the main tower is filled with tiles, you immediately perform an intermediate scoring and place a new floor on top of it, which is a bigger grid from the one before. This happens twice during the game, so 3 scoring opportunities occur during the entire game. Finally, there is an expansion that will be available through the Kickstarter called the Fall of Man expansion, which adds a few modules and rules to the game. Originally, you have a player board with 4 tracks that, when advanced on, give upgrades, such as adding carts to your elephants to carry more tiles to the construction site, or allowing for faster elephant movement, etc. With the expansion, there are more tracks to play with on your own personal tableau, some of which include a meeple that you move along the construction site adjacent to your elephant. If this meeple reaches the construction site, you place it face down onto a shared grid board, where you gain the column and the row benefit of where that meeple has been placed, and it will be placed there permanently. In addition to that, asymmetric characters also give unique abilities to players during the game. Now to compare this to other games. The first game that I thought of that played very similarly to this mechanically was Endless Winter. While Rise of Babel is a touch less complex than Endless Winter, some of the modules of Endless Winter feel like the same puzzle as you're trying to solve in Babel, especially with the puzzling interactive tile placement portion of both games. Endless Winter has multi-use cards along with deck building and more modules to tinker with, but Rise of Babel feels a little bit more focused on the tile-laying puzzle at hand in conjunction with the deck building. The Fall of Man expansion does up the complexity a bit to make it feel more like Endless Winter though, but still I don't feel like it reaches the same complexity as Endless Winter does. The next game that I thought of was Terracotta Army. Now, I haven't played this game yet, but I know that one of the hooks of this game is the interactive puzzle of placing army figures, those terracotta army figures, onto a shared board, with scoring opportunities depending on how you place them and in which directions they face, etc. There's an element of racing to place tiles before others and to block them as well, which is seen in Rise of Babel as well. One thing to mention about Babel is that there are cards that you deck build and draft that have abilities that allow you to take your own tiles off or to push other tiles from other players off as well of the construction site, making it directly more interactive and impactful than just simply blocking someone else's or racing to take a spot before someone else. My first impressions of this game is that I think this game hits a good balance between the simplicity and the elegance of deck building and an interactive puzzle that allows for healthy competition among players. Even though I played the game solo, I can extrapolate and get a sense that this game will scale well enough, puzzle-wise, with the interactive tile placement at higher player counts, perhaps at the behest of some analysis paralysis, with the order of cards that you play from your hand. And I mean this because being able to play 5 cards from your hand, and each of those cards having sometimes 2 or even 3 different options of what to do with those cards could give you some thinking time to try to figure out the best order of operations to play those cards in. But the fact that you draw into your hand before it's your turn, again, could mitigate that, once again, maybe allowing for some of the choices of other players to hinder your plans, especially with the tile placement aspect of the game. But I think there is some mitigation with the analysis paralysis that could potentially be here. This game is still under development, and because of that, I learned the game from a rulebook that is provided on Tabletop Simulator, which is where I demoed this game as well. Maybe after the time, after this recording is done, and by the time this game is fully launched on Kickstarter, the rulebook and aids will be further developed. But while I was learning from this earlier draft of the rulebook, I still was left with questions as I was trying to figure out the mechanisms of this game and the rules of this game. Fortunately, many of those questions are answered on Board Game Geek, and perhaps more of those questions as are elucidated from other players will be answered and addressed as well. But do go into that knowing that there may be some difficulty learning the game, as I did have some of those difficulties trying to parse out the rules. For example, the solo mode did not have an immediate rulebook to outline what the Automa player exactly does. I was once again able to extrapolate most of what they did based off of the cards that are available. And of course, it was a learning game, so it didn't matter to me to get all the rules perfectly, just to get a feel of how the game played. But still, if you want to play the game perfectly, it might be difficult to do so. But once again, that might be mitigated in the near future. Overall, I do have some concerns of the longevity of this game for my personal tastes. While I think this game is excellently developed, I wonder about its replayability for me and perhaps for some other people as well. I think some people will really enjoy the puzzle of the interactivity of tile placement and the focus on that in conjunction with deck building, and I think that's great. It really takes out a lot of the extra bits that you might have to worry about or be more analytical on in a game such as Endless Winter, which includes a lot of different modules and different ways to interact with the game, which may be a little overwhelming for some. For me, it seems like it will become repetitive. Speaking of Tower of Babel, it feels like it would become a little bit repetitive with time without much variation in the journey to get to laying down your puzzle. I find that Endless Winter, once again, it didn't seem very replayable to me personally because of the different mini games that you're trying to interact with. And as a culmination, if you play the game and interact with 2 or 3 of the different modules heavily during the game, you end up getting a very similar score, is my prediction, because I haven't played it multiple times, and so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it felt like you were interacting with different portions of the game and kind of coming to a same score at the end of the game, which could be summarized as a point salad type of experience. And so that for me was not, in a sense, replayable. I think it can be for some people because you get to interact with different portions of the game, and so that makes the game feel different every time. But for me, it didn't feel like there was an element of mastery to explore different parts of the game to ultimately get a better score over time, or something that is significantly better over time. Versus Rise of Babel, I feel like it's the opposite case, where there's only the tower construction as the primary focus of the game, of gaining points. And in addition to that, you are gaining points from acquiring cards, but that's it. You're only summing the points that you get from your cards, as well as how well you play the tower game, and you sum up the intermediate scoring based off of that part of the game. And so there's only two things that you can do, and I found that a little bit lacking to pique my over time. I find deck building games like Dune Imperium and Lost Ruins of Arnak intriguing in the sense that there are more ways to pursue the game points wise. For example, in Dune Imperium, you can pursue, trying to win every combat round and gain points that way, or you can really focus in on getting influence among the different factions and progressing up those tracks. Or you could try to buy as many cards that can give you points from the market row as well and create an engine there. So there are multiple ways to explore points in that game, and combining those in 2 or 3 ways, focusing really heavily on one section over the others, depending on your player, asymmetric faction as well, makes that game feel very different every time. And there is an element of mastery to that I can respect. And the same, I feel, is true with Arnak. You have different areas that you can focus on the game, the exploration or the research track as well, or even the acquiring of cards. A combination of all of those can lead to an ultimate score, and I think it's difficult to understand the game just at the base level of it, based off of 1 or 2 plays. I think you really need to sink your teeth into that game in particular to find out how each portion of the game interacts with each other, and to find some skill in repetitive play. I feel like you can get to that ceiling a little bit faster with Rise of Babel because you're ultimately only focusing on trying to play the tile laying game and acquiring cards, and that's it. And the cards themselves didn't feel very they didn't feel like they were breaking a lot of rules. Once again, to explain my thoughts on Dune Imperium, with the cards that you acquire, not only are they thematic, and it helps that Dune Imperium is based off of an IP with characters and events that do make sense in the lore itself that the game is trying to portray, but the things that they can do as well are very interesting, and they make each card feel somewhat unique. Not all of the cards do that. They each just mitigate the game in small ways here and there, but some of those cards, like there's one card where you can turn in money for points, right? And there's only 1 or maybe 2 of those types of cards that exist in the game, and so when you see that come out in the market, that could ultimately push you towards a certain strategy that you want to take. And after glancing at the cards in Rise of Babel, I felt like they all mitigated and twisted the game in small little ways here and there to give you small advantages, and you can create an engine with the way that you build your deck and trash basic cards as well. You can tailor your experience to perhaps move a lot of tiles very fast with your elephant or what have you, but it didn't feel like it was as expansile or as unique feeling as the deck building and the card engine that you are developing in games like Dune Imperium. So ultimately, all that is to say is that I think Rise of Babel is a great deck building game, and I think it really focuses, and I think that's the intention of the game, is to make a elegant deck building experience that has one focus for you to pursue, which is to build the Tower of Babel. And I think it's very similar in weight to, say, Clank. I didn't feel like the interactive board and the dungeon crawling experience related as well as perhaps Endless Winter did compared to Rise of Babel. But weight-wise, I felt like Clank and Rise of Babel are more at the same level. But because of that, I feel like Dune Imperium and Arnak have more interesting cards and more interesting ways of journeying through the game to gain points, which create an element of mastery and replayability that interest me, that I don't think Rise of Babel has quite yet. Now, with the expansion, I think it ups the complexity a little bit. It doesn't quite reach the intriguing point for me to want to replay it again over and over again, but I am not disappointed in the game that I played. I think it has been developed and designed very well. And I think if you are a fan of medium weight deck building games that cuts out a lot of fluff and kind of gets to the meat of the matter, games such as Clank and perhaps even Dominion, then I think you will enjoy Rise of Babel as well. So those are my first impressions on Rise of Babel. Once again, look for the Kickstarter in about a month's time. Thank you for consulting with me, and hope you schedule an appointment with your board gaming doctor real soon. Take care.